Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back to the Max Kolbe Little Orthodox channel. I again am Max. My apologies to all our listeners. I have been inactive the last couple of weeks due to an extreme illness, but I'm a lot better now, and we're getting back on the horse and back to producing videos and producing interesting interviews. We have several interviews lined up for the next week or two, and a couple of planned videos, including that long planned video responding to Sargon of Akkad and his anti-religious rants and his intolerance toward religious people. We'll be doing an upcoming video looking at similar from Honey Badger Brigade and other prominent online atheist so-called skeptics. Today we're interviewing a man who, I don't know if he openly identifies as atheist, but certainly he thinks of himself sort of like one. He's told me that. He's not religious. He's not super interested in religion per se, and that's perfectly fine. What I see, at least at this point in life, there's a lot of people like that. That to me is not an ideological atheist. That's someone who's lost interest in religion, lost interest in the subject of God, and that's a personal thing. I've enjoyed watching Coach Red Pill's videos. I don't always agree with him, but I do like most of what he says, and I think he gives pretty solid advice much of the time to young men. Young men are a subject of particular interest to me. I myself was in Red Pill movie and used to be the editor of A Voice for Men, and I truly believe where we are in Western civilization at the moment, what's broadly called Western civilization, is more than anything a crisis for our young men. And young men have lost any real moorings in contemporary society, at least most of them. Most of them, an awful lot of them have grown up without fathers and have no good male role models. They've lost any sense of respect for the ancient traditions, including the spiritual traditions that made the Western world what it is. And one of my goals with the Little Orthodox Project, the Escaping Atheism Project, is in fact to help young men, especially young men who are interested in the spiritual, know that there's nothing wrong with that. And so that even if you don't become religious, although I would love it if you became religious, but even if you don't, inculcating an intellectual respect for the spiritual traditions that made the West what it is can only be healthy, in my opinion. Anyway, that was a long wind-up explanation. I want everybody to please remember to like and subscribe to this channel, and I want everybody to please go check out Coach Red Pill's channel and give him a like and subscribe if you get a chance too. Now, with all that said, welcome aboard, Coach Red Pill. How are you today?
I'm doing great, and thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure.
I understand that today you're getting ready to upload a new video. What was that video going to be on?
It's about building confidence. I upload every day, and they're usually between 7 minutes and 20 minutes, and every day. And it's been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed working on content, and it's just terrific. And the idea that today's video, it's about building confidence, because it seems to me that a lot of people talk about, you should build confidence, but they don't quite understand, why they should build confidence. And that for me has always been a key question. In everything that you're doing, you should ask yourself why you are doing it. And I think that a lot of times people find themselves doing things that they shouldn't be doing because they haven't asked themselves the why question. Now, if you're doing something reasonable, asking why you're doing it is no problem. The times I have noticed that people get upset when you ask why are you doing something or why are you saying something is because they don't have a clear notion of why they're doing it, and it flusters them and so on. And so my whole approach has always been based on the question why, and so anyway, why build confidence? And well, I talk about this, and I'm going to be uploading it later today. But yeah, I want to talk about the whole issue what we were talking about before this stream started of talking about atheism and the atheist community. I don't personally understand them because, as I mentioned to Todd Lewis, who you were friendly with, who's a great guy.
Todd Lewis, yeah, he runs Praise of Folly. Nice little channel he's got there.
Yeah, he's a great guy. And the thing is, see, I'm an atheist or agnostic, but I am not antagonistic towards those who are religious. On the contrary, I tend to view religious belief a little bit wistfully. I wish I had it, because it's very clear to me that religious belief is a strong force for good in people's lives. It gives them balance. It centers them. It gives them a moral sense, a moral certitude. And I think that that's a very good thing, especially in this day and age where everybody is untethered and drifting around, morally speaking. And so I respect that. But you see, the atheists who are so actively against religious people, I don't quite understand them. Because it seems as if their zeal is merely religious in their desire to put down and strip away people's religious belief. And so I've always thought to myself that a lot of these very militant atheists, in a very real sense, have exchanged one religious belief for another. And that's my opinion, at least.
I see the same thing. To make it clear, I was an atheist for a very long time, and I took my atheism rather seriously. Not quite as extreme as what's common today in young men, though, I notice. When I was an atheist, I had an attitude much like yours. In fact, I had the attitude that, maybe I'm the wrong one. I can look at, I did accept, look, there's all these religions in the world and some are more popular, but why do you believe any of them? But I could never fathom, like I would encounter a Hindu or even go to a family gathering of Hindus, and I didn't consider it my job to just chastise them and treat them like retarded monkeys, right? I had friends who were real serious believing Jews, and instead of being hostile, I was just curious, right?
Right.
Why you live this way? What do you get out of it? Why do you believe this? Same with Christians. And by the way, the world is full of very different Christians. If you've met one Christian, you've met one Christian.
Yeah.
And it has bothered me for the longest time, because when I was an atheist, it would just never occur to me to be rude, condescending, and nasty to religious people, unless they were being rude.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that goes without saying, sure.
But one of the things I've also found is that in young people in particular, a cultural, at least in the English-speaking world, a cultural mentality has come that what they call skepticism is the way to learn things and the way to be rational and even the way to be scientific. And the problem with that mentality is that if you look at the whole idea of skepticism hard enough, and I think the online community is starting to notice this, if you look at the idea of skepticism long enough, you realize you are capable of being skeptical of anything at any time for any reason whatsoever. In other words, there is no bedrock to skepticism. There just isn't. Every time you're skeptical of something, you're assuming your conclusion. Now, you may assume rightly, but you're still always making an assumption. And I think it's really important that young men in particular hear that, because young men, what I find with young men, and I'm an old guy, right? I'm in my 50s. I believe you're chasing me. We're in the same demographic box anyway. And what I find with young men is young men are always trying to prove themselves. They just are. Whether they admit it or not, they're always trying to prove their intelligence, their worthiness, they're better than the other guys. There's a certain natural competitiveness that way that's in men. Women are competitive too, but it's a whole different dynamic, right?
Yeah.
I'm not even going to go into that here today, but young men are trying to prove themselves, trying to prove themselves smart, superior, better, or at least worthy. And so-called skepticism gives what I would call a really cheap, easy path to looking smart or seeming smart, or even fooling yourself into thinking you're smart because you said, aha, you hadn't fooled me, I'm smarter than you. But that's what you do anytime you're skeptical of anything. I define, and I think this is important for young people, especially who are watching the YouTube videos, who are hanging out in the various online forums that call themselves scientific rationalists, call themselves skeptics, sometimes outright call themselves atheists. It's all an ideological point of view that rests on the notion that if you take on this label, you're now smarter, better, and wiser than the rest of humanity. And
I think that's very right. It's very true.
I even see that in some of the smarter ones, like I mentioned Sargon, or maybe Godsod, or one of those other people. It's not that they have nothing to say, but they fall down because the skeptic's path on any question is always the easiest path. I mean, it might make you unpopular, but otherwise, intellectually, it's always the easiest path. I mean, just watch. I'll be skeptical of the Big Bang Theory. I'll be skeptical of evolution. I'll be skeptical that you could be skeptical of literally anything. I noticed this in myself when I was an atheist, and I had to fight it. And I've noticed it especially since then. I think the biggest amusing illustration of that, I don't know if you saw where Armored Skeptic used something he called skepticism to defeat somebody's arguments, and he just made an idiot of himself. And,
well, he's not an intellectual heavyweight. Let's be frank here. Sorry about that. The police are coming for me finally.
Oh, finally, we've all been waiting, man. I had.
The thing is, I studied philosophy in college, and I specialized in epistemology, and I had a very, very good instructor, by the way, Walter Sinnott Armstrong, who's a big brain. But anyway, the thing is, see, epistemology is theories of knowledge, and of course, it's how you understand the world around you. And the thing is, see, a skeptical, a doubting Thomas, constant skepticism is the easiest position to take. And it's ultimately fruitless in the sense that, you know, it doesn't give up any interesting insights into the world. And so to be skeptical about everything and to be doubting everything, oh, I doubt the Big Bang, I doubt that you exist, you know, Max Kolbe is just a figment of my imagination. Well, you know, how is this useful to us in a practical sense insofar as understanding the world, modeling the world in a way that makes sense and is predictable? So my problem with skepticism as an approach is, yes, of course, skepticism can defeat every single argument if you go, you know, nitty-gritty enough. If you start denying the very possibility of knowing things, then yes, of course, skepticism wins every time. But it's not useful, all right? On a strict philosophical sense, if you go all the way to the bottom, yes, you cannot defend practically anything from a skeptic attack on a logical basis. But the thing is, see, as human beings who we do exist in the world, we do interact with one another. That kind of skeptical approach serves no purpose. It's an intellectual game, and it's all fun and games when you're, you know, 22 years old in college. But when you're a grown man, it's stupid because you have the reality around you to deal with.
Well, and it sounds like
that's my problem with it.
It sounds like you studied real academic epistemology, which is worth it.
Yeah.
Although I would, for you and for anyone in your audience, I would add a strong dose of teleology to your epistemology if you want to be really good at it. But on the other hand, there's at least two flavors of what's called epistemology you'll find out on the internet that are not good epistemology to study. One of them is what they call street epistemology. I don't know if you've run into street epistemology.
No, it's not. I've never heard of it.
Well, it's you can buy books on it, and it's put together by evangelical ideological atheists seeking to convert people or at least destroy people's beliefs. And they're basically using epistemology, but starting with the assumption with their epistemology that all religious beliefs are false and everybody has to prove them to you, and you can just disprove them by playing word games. In other words, it's not honest epistemology, you know, designed to find truth. It's a dishonest epistemology designed to come to a predetermined conclusion. And so I would warn people about studying street epistemology. You'll learn a little bit about it, but if you want real epistemology, you want to go to more academic sources like Coach Red Pill here is doing. And I'll repeat my recommendation to also study teleology with it. Then you'll be a lot more coherent.
Yeah, but going back to the problem of these atheists and this crop of atheists who have morphed into the skeptic community, and they are they sort of like are squatters in a very large segment of the YouTube community, and they have garnered a very, very large audience. I mean, altogether, I would estimate that. Of course, there's a lot of overlap insofar as subscriptions are concerned. But if I had to guess, I'd say about 1 million people a million individuals are subscribed to these people altogether, right? Now, that's 1 million people. That's a lot of people. But it seems to me that the skeptics, the formerly atheists and now skeptics, have failed to do much with their enormous audience. They have failed to mobilize them in a direction that one would think is worthwhile. Because for the most part, what they've done is, just beat up on SJWs, beat up on feminists, right? Make these videos like saying how funny and stupid they are. But that's like, it's easy pickings. It's low-hanging fruit. They're not trying to mobilize their audience to defend certain things that ought to be defended. Like, for instance, on YouTube, they're unrolling this thing called limited state. And we've already seen a couple of people who are in limited state. It's basically this limbo insofar as YouTube is concerned, because YouTube will host your video, but will not provide any links to it, will not allow you to link to it. It's basically, it's there but invisible. And so unless you know exactly where it is with the exact link to that particular video, nobody can ever see it. You can't embed the video in any other website. You can tweet the video, but you can't watch the video in Twitter. You have to go to YouTube. It's a purgatory that they're doing, and it has to do with the fact that Google is trying to curtail quote unquote offensive speech. And offensive speech, of course, can be anything.
Yep.
Now, community, which has amassed 1 million people at least. What are they doing about it? Oh, they're complaining and moaning that they got demonetized. So what? We have a clear and present danger to the notion of freedom of speech, where you have Google happily tossing people into this purgatory, and nobody's saying anything in the skeptic community. They're not mobilizing their followers.
No, they're not.
And that drives me nuts, because the followers of the skeptics could be a powerful force for good. And the skeptics, all they have to do is organize themselves a little bit, and instead of being so concerned about their page views, their money, and how much money they're getting from ad revenue and so on and so forth, they should just direct it towards something worthwhile, a more worthwhile goal. And it seems to me that they're not doing that at all, and they have no interest in doing that at all. All they do is complain about it, complain about what's going on, and then passively accept it. So that's why my feeling about the skeptic community is that what's known as the skeptic community are a bunch of people whom I do not care to be associated with, even though I share a lot of their beliefs and thinking, because they are juvenile to me. They don't seem to be engaging with the world on a more serious level. And
No.
when they go after people who are religious, to what purpose are they going after people who are religious? What is the okay? I'm not talking about like people like the Westboro Baptist Church who goes and protest, when at people's funerals. Okay, I'm talking about run-of-the-mill, ordinary believers. What exactly is the point of stripping people of their belief? None whatsoever. But it seems that they're nihilists. I think that's what I'm basically saying. The thing that bothers me about the atheist community, which is now morphed into the skeptic community, is that they are essentially nihilists. They don't believe in anything, and they are gleeful about it. And that, I think, is a bad example for young people, and certainly not the sort of people that we want to be leading a large movement on YouTube. We want people who actually have beliefs, who have projects, who have policy goals that are achievable, and that can help our society. But
yes,
the problem is that these skeptics, these atheists, don't believe in that. They don't believe in the common good.
no.
And I do believe in the common good. I believe in the common good, and I think that every single one of us depends on one another, whether we like it or not. but
Well,
we depend on one another.
That's exactly right. I mean, and by the way, well, here's how I honestly see it. And I have multiple books I can recommend and multiple sources if people want it. The truth of the matter is, what was called the New Atheism, which was mostly an English speaking world issue, the New Atheism, the Four Horsemen, was a social justice project from day one. It always was. And if you look very carefully at what you find in the books of Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, and Sam Harris, and if you look carefully even at what is being said now by these activist atheists who claim, well, you know, the Four Horsemen are over, I'm not a new atheist, I'm just an atheist, but then they repeat the same Marxist talking points. And the talking points, by the way, are Marxist talking points and are directly sourceable to 19th and 20th century communist sources. They really are. All this stuff about how science has proven we have no need for religion, science has overcome primitive religious superstition, people used to believe in God but now, and magic, but now we have science. These are all really old ideas, actually, that go at least back to the 19th century, and they're easily confronted and even debunked in many cases. The old strain of atheists was usually either someone who had just lost interest or never had any interest in religion, or they were an intellectual powerhouse, actually, like a Nietzsche, to some extent a Hume, or even a Sartre. In other words, they took their worldview seriously. What's happened since the New Atheist fad, and I will call it a fad, from starting about 10 years ago, is this is essentially a cult movement to teach you that you're smarter and better and wiser than your fellow human beings as long as you just don't believe in any religion.
Yeah.
And that's actually joining a cult and a cult movement, and that's actually joining a cause that's going to tell you you're really smart whether you really are or not. So it's going to and it is going to trap you in nihilism. It is, and even to some extent, nihilism feels empowering at first. I'm the one who's finally figured out this is all meaningless. I'm the one who's figured out all your primitive morality is just social constructs, and you were brainwashed to believe those things, and blah, blah, blah. And in the end, that is a non-helpful, it is a very nihilistic worldview. And I think there should be no surprise that, and actually I can show this to you, there's numerous studies showing, contrary to what you may have found, atheists are actually more likely to be depressed, more likely to be suicidal. And it is, you know, I can assert several reasons I believe that is true, but the bottom line is it's just plain observable reality. And the point I like to make to young people in particular is to stop and think for a minute what you're really accepting on faith if you accept this particular ideology. And it is an ideology. It's very ideological, exactly as you've just described. If you've accepted this, you've actually closed yourself off to ideas. I don't know how many times I've heard them say, you know, religion has no place in politics, which is another way of saying you want your values enforced, not mine. That's exactly how I see it. And that doesn't work. There's a lot of people in the skeptic community. I'll name them. You know, Sargon of Akkad claims to be a classical liberal. He's a good example. He is not a classical liberal. You know why? He won't talk to religious people seriously about their concerns, their goals, and their desires about how to make a society that they want to live in too. This, you know, saying that religion has no place in politics is another way of saying religious people get to the back of the bus and shut up and say nothing, or only speak when I agree that your idea is worthy to be discussed at all.
Exactly.
That's not classical liberalism. It's not any form of liberalism. And it is mind closing. I mean, without preaching to you, I could give you 24 reasons right now why I think there's a God, and why I believe the Christian story, for that matter. But that's not gonna. That's a pointless exercise in somebody who has just started out with the a priori axiomatic assertion that nothing a religious person believes is rational, and can just be dismissed out of hand. How does that get you anywhere? You just closed yourself off.
It doesn't lead anywhere. What?
No. It really doesn't. You've just declared yourself smarter than the rest of humanity, and the rest of humanity beneath you, until the rest of humanity thinks like you.
Exactly.
To me, it's exactly like the social justice warriors. It's exactly like the feminists. They're going to declare what's in bounds for an idea and what's out of bounds. And so when I look at a guy like Sargon or Shu or Armored or Crowd or any of those people, it's like you're just the atheists who lost the argument. And the feminist and social justice atheists won the argument, and you're mad because you want to be the atheists in charge. Instead of saying, listen, it's pretty normal for people to be religious. Maybe we should talk to them, get their perspective, and see where we have common ground and can maybe even build something together. And there are atheists like that. They just seem to be rare as hen's teeth at the moment. And that really needs to change, in my view. But when I was an atheist, I had Christian friends, and I hung out with them. I would even be curious and go do a little Bible study with them now and then just to get to their point of view. I would often just then leave and go, well, nothing was convincing about that, but they believe it, so it's their business. Why can't shouldn't the average young man go out of his way to do something like that? Go meet some religious people instead of putting them on trial where you're the judge and you're the arbiter of truth. You just ask them, why do you believe what you believe? And, what are some values we might share? That would be a mature man's response and attitude, I would think.
Yeah, I agree. For instance, in my own case, one of my closest friends is an Anglican pastor, and he's been trying to convert me for years, right? But the thing is, in all seriousness, we're very close friends, and we have disagreements. But you see, I respect his point of view. And we've had long discussions as to where he is coming from as a man of God. And the fact that he and I have very different ideas about something so fundamental, and yet we respect each other's point of view, is, I think, that what a classical liberal ought to be. But the thing is, as you said correctly, a lot of these skeptics, they claim to be classical liberals, but when the rubber meets the road, they are unwilling to speak to certain people whom they consider to be wrong thinkers. And religious believers are one of them. And like you said, a lot of these skeptics, a lot of these atheists, what they become is they become religious fanatics without God.
Yep.
Because they are equally fanatical, equally closed-minded. They just don't happen to have a God. But it's the same thing, the same kind of intolerance of I'm not talking about religious people. I'm talking about extreme people who just are completely closed-minded and they believe in God, but it could be anything. It's not that they really believe in God. They could be, members of the Communist Party in the old Soviet Union. They could be Nazis and members of the SS. They could be, Jacobins during the terror in France. I mean, this kind of closed-mindedness and inability to see, not just merely inability, but not wanting to see any point of view that is different, especially on the big issues. Believing in God is a big issue. It's one of the fundamental issues insofar as a person's intellectual baggage is concerned, their intellectual makeup. Now, there are those who are believers and those who are not. And that is a core issue of how they tend to look at the world around them. However, you have to be able to accept those who have fundamentally different points of view on such cornerstone issues. If you do not, then you're not going to be able to have any kind of dialogue. And if you cannot have any kind of dialogue, in the end, what you're going to be having is a war, right? And we don't want that. We want to have a society that is civilized, where we can accept one another's differences of opinion, differences in terms of ideas. If we don't have that, if we don't have true tolerance, not this ersatz bullshit that is passed around as tolerance, true tolerance of different points of view, different ideas, different thoughts. If we don't have that true tolerance, that true diversity of opinion, because diversity is not an issue of skin color, it's not an issue of race, it is an issue of ideas. I mean, people have forgotten that the whole notion of diversity, of racial diversity, was in order to bring in different points of views and different realities. And what's happened is that it's become incredibly racist, because all that matters is the different color of skin. But if there's any kind of difference of opinion, different ideas, then those people are summarily excluded. It's like the black conservative, like Tree of Logic, for instance. She's a great YouTuber, and she has been denounced in the worst, most horrible terms by people just because she happens to be a black conservative woman, right? And that's just completely unfair. We want diversity, true diversity, because skin color, it's just skin color. Different
skin
thoughts,
color,
now there's diversity.
yes,
You know?
and it's the same. They'll say anybody who questions the feminist party line is misogynist, including any woman who does so. Straight people are under the gun now. I can fully attest to you, and many of my fellow Christians can attest to you that in many of those circles, just being a Christian gets you auto-dismissed, laughed at, and assumed to be a mental incompetent. And I guess that's okay if you're going to be a feminist or a social justice type, but if you're one of those who has real problems with those ideologies, you should at least think about making some Christian friends, even if you don't become one. You should also think about making friends in other religions too, as long as they're not wacky religions like Satanism or whatever. But truly, if you want a diverse intellect, if you want to enrich your own intellect, go talk to some religious people who might just challenge you. I mean, I've even got some smart Orthodox Jews who will challenge any atheist really hard, who are friends of mine. But okay, anyway, we're just rambling here, but we have a commenter. Peter Gray says, and I like this, skeptics have recently had a chance to face reality, and I don't think they realize what happened. They rose, he says rise, but I think he means they rose on debunking. And he says that's a key word, debunking, a key word. Really dumb people like Francesca Ramsey, Lacey Green, etc. But it turned out that these are the CEOs who make decisions. They don't share the views to debunk or discuss. They just impose them. That's exactly right. In fact, I'm gonna give another lesson. I've already mentioned skepticism it's a nothing. You could be skeptical of anyone or anything at any time for any reason. This is also true of what is called debunking. Debunking is so popular in the atheist skeptic community. So I'm going to repeat another thing. Debunking is the same way. It's usually really easy to debunk something. And sometimes it's possible to debunk something that doesn't even deserve debunking. Give me the U.S. Constitution, I'll debunk it for you. Give me any scientific paper, and I'll find a way to debunk it for you. Because you find the flaw wherever it is, no matter how tenuous the flaw is. Focus on the flaw. There, you've got your start on a debunking. But
like I said, I think the thing that drives me a little bit nuts is that all this debunking serves no purpose. See, I'm a very practical guy. If believing that whatever you want to believe in, I don't care what it is, but if it helps you and it helps the society, fine. I will be very honest with you. I personally am not a believer in God, but I think that the belief in God is a very good thing for a society. Therefore, I don't have a problem with it. Because I think that a society that is God-fearing, that believes in God, tends to be a lot of things. Tends to be more moral. Tends to be kinder to strangers, kinder to the heterodox. Because I've seen it. I've seen societies that are religious, and they do not like in Hollywood movies. Anybody who's not a religious who shows up to some religious town, they just get driven out of town, or it's like Deliverance or something like that. But in reality, what I have experienced firsthand, not somebody told me, but I saw it, and it happened to me. It was my experience that those religious communities where a non-believer or somebody who is outside of their religious belief arrives, they are invariably kind. It's when societies become so atomized and so lacking in anything to believe in greater than themselves that those societies tend to be distrustful, violent. And so from that point of view, it seems to me that religious belief is a good thing and that we should be encouraging it, encouraging those beliefs that help us to have a better, happier society. Because also, here's the other thing. All these, skeptics and all the rest of it, like you said before, they're all depressed. They're all unhappy. They're so damn unhappy. So what exactly is the point of doing all of this stuff? I don't get it myself.
People instinctively seek meaning. and purpose. They just do. And even if we look at it from a totally sociological perspective and dismiss the idea that there's any God at all, people who believe in it still believe, what they believe is that this is true of almost any sane religious belief, is that there is still an ultimate right and wrong, not subject to debate. And that at some level, you're going to pay a price if you're deceitful, dishonest, murderous. Somewhere along the lines, you're going to pay for all that. And that is that at minimum is a check on your own behavior. It's the sort of this is something men used to understand, especially the concept of honor and integrity. And what are honor and integrity? The shortest things, the one that, the cops are after us again.
Yeah, again, yeah, I know. Sorry about that.
I believe that if you have no idea of God at all and no belief at all, then honor and integrity become extraordinarily difficult, because honor and integrity most frequently of all, are about doing the right thing, even when you know nobody's looking, or even when you know that you could get away with the wrong thing. If you know there's a right thing and you do the right thing, you've got some kind of idea of God. You just do. Otherwise, you're just a complete nihilist and narcissist. I think this is why universally people even tend to look upon the godless as kind of dangerous, because they're like, it's not that they don't believe so much as like, well, where do they get any sense of honor, integrity, and accountability from? Only what you can talk other people into believing? Well, okay. I think these are important issues, and I think young men should be encouraged to explore them. And the worst thing you could do to a young man who's spiritually curious is tell him he's a fool to even be curious and want to explore these things. No. If you're at all, most of the greatest religious leaders in history were men, and some of them are true heroes. I mean, we can argue about any of them because they're flawed, but
everybody's flawed. You know, that doesn't take away from the fact of their successes and achievements. You know?
That's exactly right.
And in point of fact, I would argue that precisely because of the flaws of so many human beings, the fact that they have achieved something is more noteworthy. Because in spite of their flaws, in spite of their of the things that they lacked, they achieved great things. So, like, to pivot a little bit the conversation, what's going on here in the United States with knocking down all the Confederate statues and all the rest of it. See, the last time I checked, no statue was like beaming out rays, making everybody racist. Okay, the last time I checked, those statues were just like hunks of metal, just up on pedestals, and that was that. Right now, this tearing them down, what purpose is being served? Okay, and of course, everybody has flaws. Like Martin Luther King Jr., right? He plagiarized his doctoral thesis, and he was a womanizer, and some would argue that he abused women. What does that mean? That we have to, scrub him from the history books because he committed a few sins here and there and was not the perfect human being? Of course not. All right. Does that mean that his achievements, that what he fought for and struggled, is not noteworthy? That he was not a decent man who tried to do good? No, he was a decent man who did some bad things. I mean, because we all do. But it's not this bizarre kind of puritanical kind of either you are perfectly good or you are evil and you must be thrown to the wolves. But that is exactly the kind of mentality which is springing up across the United States, and it's becoming a hysteria. I mean, on Twitter, I was just today, as a matter of fact, called a Nazi fascist because I disagreed with somebody's, I disagreed with the whole notion of illegal immigrants. My own parents were immigrants to the United States, legal immigrants. I understand the drive of a lot of illegal immigrants, but they are illegal immigrants, and it's not fair. And there are a lot of other people who are patiently waiting and doing all the necessary paperwork and what have you to legally emigrate to the United States. Why is it that some illegal has more rights and more opportunities and everybody feels so sorry for them as opposed to the legal ones? That just doesn't seem fair. And yet that point of view, which is, I would think, nobody in their right mind would claim that that's a fascist point of view or a neo-Nazi point of view. Well, because of that point of view, I was called a fascist. I've been called a Nazi, and it seems insane. It's hysterical. And what is going on with people that they have become hysterical, whereas a simple political difference of opinion on particular issues turns somebody not into somebody that you disagree with, but somebody who is evil and somebody who must be destroyed, deplatformed, just expunged from society. Is that the kind of society that these people want? That one little mistake, one little disagreement, and you're just kicked out of the society altogether? That's what it seems to me.
This is a thing you will find. I'll go ahead and give my opinion, which you don't have to agree with. But my opinion is that it is rooted in godlessness. At least at one time in the United States, most people at least believed in God, at least believed in a higher purpose, even if they had no religion. And they believed in that sort of accountability even when nobody's looking. Even when you could get away with the wrong thing, you do the right thing anyway. That mentality is gone, and I truly believe that what people do is they substitute religion for political ideology when you do that to them. So they either tend to become communists, which is ultimately what the social justice left is, or an awful lot of them actually do become neo-Nazis, or let me be clear, the race realists are not wrong about everything, but the most extreme race realists, they usually tend to be godless and contemptuous of religion, and to have the most extreme views on things like that. And I think it's because we haven't given the younger generation a solid moral framework to start from, so that even if you depart from the moral framework, well, let's say you're Catholic, and or you're Christian in general, and you do think homosexuality is a sin, but or Christianity says homosexuality is a sin, but you personally depart from that in some fashion. Fine, you at least know what you're departing from. You have a base that you started with for whatever change in point of view. If you don't even have that, you've got a problem. Hey, listen, we got to close up soon, and we got a couple more commenters, so I'm gonna include them. Fi-Fi Guru says, not really though. If you have no conscience, no sense of guilt, and the police are retarded, then you can get away with every crime without paying a price for it. The question of God differs from this. Robert E. Lee was against slavery. It's all well, okay, that's a different comment. You're correct in what I would argue with you there, Fi-Fi, is that the question of God does relate here, because again, if you have some idea of God, even if it's the vague idea of the God of the philosophers or the AA idea of God or whatever it is, you do think there's an ultimate right and wrong, and it matters even when nobody's looking. If you reject that whole idea, then you kind of automatically revert to a sort of narcissism that says, well, what's right is what seems right to me at the moment. Again, you're kind of fruitless when you're in that position. It's not that you can't. Well, let me finish though. It's not that you can't from there come to a fairly coherent moral or ethical view, but it's a lot more work, and you should do it. Like, really, where are you getting your moral standards from that are non-arbitrary? If you're not going to use the Christian religion or any particular religion, what are you going to use? Because I got to tell you, hyper-nationalism and globalist secular humanism are failures. And you've probably noticed by now that they're failures. What were you about to say, Coach?
Well, I was going to comment on Poisoning the Well here says the morality only comes from God argument. Well, actually, I don't. There are lots of moralities that don't come from God. In my own case, my own sense of morality, how can I put it? I can understand how a lot of people feel more comfortable having a morality that springs from religious belief. And I don't have a problem with that. In my own case, which is a secular, agnostic, atheistic sense, my own sense of morality comes from a fundamental fact that, see, consciousness, it seems to me, is precious. Consciousness is limited. And the beauty of consciousness, the ability to perceive the world as a conscious entity, I think is the ultimate good, and that we should make every effort to extend both the quantity of consciousness as well as the quality of that consciousness. Precisely for this reason, I'm against abortion, because I believe that a child at the moment of conception has the possibility of consciousness, and therefore to deny that consciousness, to take it away from a fetus, is morally wrong. And for the same reason, I'm also against the death penalty. But also my anti-death penalty is a little more complex than that, because there are other issues too. But for the sake of this conversation, to make it simple, now morality can come from both a belief in God and from a secular, atheistic, agnostic belief system. The problem we are having with skepticism is that they are throwing out the baby with the bathwater, in the sense that they are denying the existence of God. Fine. But they are also denying the possibility of a consistent, universal moral framework.
Yep.
Because that's what their nihilism ultimately ends in. Okay, and that is what I disagree with. I think it's completely wrong, you know? I think that it's very easy to argue from the notion of consciousness, of consciousness as the ultimate good. It's very easy to create a morality that satisfies all of the needs that we have, and also a morality that that is not nihilistic, or is not narcissistic, because consciousness does not, a morality that is focused towards the development and protection and expansion of consciousness does not mean that it is a morality for the sake of the individual, which is what nihilism leads to. If nihilism and extreme skepticism denies the possibility of anything else, and it's, you know, how can we know anything? Well, yeah, then it becomes a narcissistic morality where the good of the individual is the highest good, and everybody else is just secondary to that, which is not a kind of society that can function for very long.
Well,
go ahead.
Go ahead and finish your thought, and then we got to wrap up.
Okay, well, but my thinking is that, see, you can have a universal morality without a belief in God, all right? But what you cannot have with extreme skepticism, extreme skepticism, and a mindless atheism that seeks to just destroy everything, every single belief in that road, that nihilistic road, that one leads to chaos and collapse. Okay, that's why I'm so opposed to this extreme skepticism.
Well, and we agree on about 85% of that. We disagree on some of it. Maybe we'll have another conversation about it sometime, because it is about time to get closing. I'm going to respond to that a little, and to another commenter here, poisoning the well again, actually. He says, oh, gee, the morality only comes from God argument. That's because morality only comes from God, and you're both wrong. In any case, he says, I don't require a God to police me when I'm alone. I have a sense of morality because I have a brain. It's people who lack intelligence or who have a mental issue who need God, that need God to keep them in line. There we go with the arrogant, condescending, atheist attitude that I'm speaking of. The ludicrous notion that religious people are less intelligent than you, less thoughtful from you, and therefore somehow less moral because they have accepted an authority beyond themselves. That's the ultimate problem I see with all atheism. It's one of the reasons I'm not an atheist anymore, although it's hardly the only reason or the main reason. It's certainly one of them. When a person denies that there is, we don't even have to use the word God if it freaks you out, that there is a higher purpose, that there is an intelligence or a purpose or something that is above human judgment, that is setting something that is ultimately right or wrong. Let me tell you, Aristotle, 300 years before Jesus, he was no Christian, he may have not even liked Christianity, constructed an ethical framework, a pretty good one, but he said, without some idea of God, you can't do this. And I have surveyed the literature, I've talked to countless people, and while it's very clear that some atheists, like Coach Red Pill, have managed to cobble together and put together what sounds like a pretty workable moral code, as individuals, you can't sell that to other people. You're leaving it to every individual to decide on his own initiative and his own conscience what right and wrong are going to be. That automatically pushes you to some sort of subjectivity. This and complete subjectivity, so that if I decide, you know what, poisoning the world really would be better off if I raped you and cut your tongue out so you could never speak again. Just to give you a, it's an extreme. Obviously, I would never do that. But let's say I just decided the world would clearly be better off if I did that to you. Mm-hmm. You can only go to some sort of consequences. Well, what if you get caught if you do that? Like, well, I won't get caught. There has to be some kind of idea. This is why even classical liberals like John Locke said, you should at least be a deist. You should at least have an idea, yes, there's a moral authority higher than me. And there's a moral authority higher than the government. And we need some way that we can all look, and so that most rational adults can look and say, look, you just violated this standard. You just did. I may even sympathize with why you did it, but you did it and it was wrong. If you don't have that, you are actually defaulting either to your own individual judgment, or you're defaulting to the state or to the community at large, which is where you get lynch mobs and show trials and all of this. This is what I see on the far right as well as on the far left. You had the wrong thought. We need to destroy you because you're obviously the problem in the world. I mean, mind you, sometimes there is an individual who's just so bad, you just have to get rid of them, like everybody's favorite example, Hitler. But that's going to extreme.
I always bring up Jeffrey Dahmer.
There's another one.
Is the
There's
ultimate
another one.
example.
Who said, by the way, who literally said, there is no God, therefore there's no reason I can't do what I want. Yeah, he really did say that. And he was crazy, of course. He was crazy.
Let's hope he was crazy, yeah.
Well, yeah, exactly. But these are the kind of, and Poisoning Well says they shouldn't need it. Well, who are you to say they don't need it, Poisoning the Well? And for that matter, who are you to say you don't need it? From my perspective, you think you're going to reinvent the wheel. You're going to reinvent thousands of years. Let me just close with this. Let's go with the word tradition. I'm going to recommend you read some G.K. Chesterton. Chesterton's talked a lot about tradition versus, he had a real good article he wrote about 100 years ago on how stupid so-called debunking is, because debunking is easy and skepticism is easy. But he just points out tradition is the democracy of the dead. Tradition is the democracy of the dead. What your fathers, your grandfathers, your great-grandfathers, your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfathers all knew, if these are values that endured, there's probably something to them. And I would suggest at least being open-minded to that, instead of just declaring you're smarter than the average bear, so you can figure it all out on your own. You don't need any wisdom from past generations. Or you're just going to auto-decide on your own, unilaterally, this old traditional belief is garbage, but that one is good. There does come a point where you as a man, a human being, should have the humility and say, maybe I'm not that smart. Maybe these ancients had some wisdom. Maybe there's a reason society survived with these ideas. And maybe it's possible that many of those ideas, we didn't just survive despite them. We survived because of them. All right, I'm going to let it go at that.
That reminds me of G.K. Chesterton, and to close out our conversation, I'll just quote from him, if you don't mind. O God of earth and altar, bow down and hear our cry. Our earthly rulers falter, our people drift and die. The walls of gold entomb us, and the swords of scorn divide. Take not thy thunder from us, but take away our pride. That was G.K. Chesterton for you.
What's it from?
Some hymnal that he wrote. I forget which one.
G.K. Chesterton is always worth reading, and yes, he was religious, but I know people in a lot of religious and non-religious backgrounds enjoy him. That's a great quote. Thank you for sharing it, Coach. All right, everybody. I hope we're going to have another conversation with Coach Red Pill again. In the meantime, please go subscribe to Coach Red Pill's channel, especially if you're a young man. And please give us a like, a subscribe. Please check us out on Escaping Atheism. And God bless everybody.
Okay, so long, and thanks for having me on.